When Aerosmith walked into the studio to record Toys in the Attic, they were still a struggling rock band trying to prove themselves. But what came out of those sessions didn't just launch their career, it defined their identity. From dirty guitar riffs and experimental funk to the birth of genre-bending anthems like Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, this album didn't just elevate their sound, it was the sound that made the band famous. Today I'm going to talk about how Toys in the Attic became a classic and arguably their best album to date. Toys in the Attic was a turning point for the band. This was the first time they had to write most of the album from scratch, as the previous albums featured songs they had been performing for years when they were still trying to make it, playing the small clubs, no pun intended. In other words, most of the songs were written right before recording the album. The band also worked with producer Jack Douglas closely for 2 months of pre-production before going into the studio. Jack Douglas also didn't want the band to be riding on the road, so he decided that the band needed to dedicate this time in focusing on the album. He acted as a sixth member of the band during this process. In turn, the songwriting was more collaborative and spontaneous. For example, the song Toys in the Attic originated with a riff that Joe Perry played in the studio, and after hearing said riff, Steven Tyler started to write the lyrics. Then there was the bass riff to Sweet Emotion that was originally written by Tom Hamilton when he was in high school, and he presented said riff to the band during this jam session. The band also tried to do some different stuff. They recorded a cover song, but they decided not to make it a rock song and just record it in a way that stayed true to the original work. Then there was the recording process, which had a live feel. Keep in mind it was 1975, so they were using this 16-track analog piece of recording equipment, and that made the album sound more raw. All this hard work paid off because Toys in the Attic became Aerosmith's most commercially successful studio album in the United States. The album sold 9 million copies, and it became much more popular as a result. This album had 2 hit singles, which were Sweet Emotion and Walk This Way. The first breakthrough single was Sweet Emotion. Now you might be confused. You might be thinking that Dream On was their first big hit, but it actually wasn't, because Dream On was re-released as a single later on. Their first top 40 single was Sweet Emotion. It peaked at number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100. Then after that, the song Walk This Way peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1977. So to clarify, their first big hit was Sweet Emotion, and then later the re-release of Dream On eventually became their highest charting song, which would later reach number 6. But that's not to say Walk This Way was not an important song, because it would later reach 4 in the 80s when it was covered by this up-and-coming rap duo, which I'll talk about later, and possibly the first rap-rock collaboration. Toys in the Attic also had a more diverse sound than some of their previous albums. For example, they tried different things in songwriting. They tried some new production techniques. They were willing to experiment with different styles. For example, one thing they experimented with was this blues and R&B sound that was most apparent on their cover of Bull Moose Jackson's big 10-inch record.
Get her going when I take out my big 10-inch record of the band,
which was a 1952 rhythm and blues song, and this song was very faithful to the original. It included some jazz-style instrumentation, but also the band continued to take on hard rock and blues to another level, as their sound was crossed between the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin. But not only that, they brought in some funk that was inspired by this New Orleans funk band, and that was the main inspiration for the main guitar riff for Walk This Way, and even the song Sweet Emotion, as they described it as funk rock with some psychedelic funk. Not only that, Tom Hamilton's bass line for Sweet Emotion was inspired by Jeff Beck's Rice Pudding. And there were also some contributions of some other members. So for example, Tom Hamilton came up with a riff for Uncle Salty early on in the band's history, but he hadn't used it up until now, and Joe Perry came up with the main riff for the title track, Toys in the Attic, during a studio session, which was kind of at the last minute, because they needed one more song to complete the album. Not only that, Steven Tyler made some important contributions to the album. So for example, his vocals on the song Walk This Way are considered to be an early example of rap music, and for the other songs he would often write lyrics after the music was completed. A lot of times he would just walk around and sing along to the tracks. If you want to become a member of this channel, for only 99 cents, you get early access to my videos, and for $2.99, you get early access. Plus, you can request album reviews. There's a join button below or a link in the video description. I want to delve a little deeper into some of the key songs in the album. Let me start with Walk This Way. This was a song that originated back in December of 1974 in Honolulu, Hawaii. Aerosmith was opening for the Guess Who, and during a sound check, Joe Perry was playing around with some guitar riffs, and he was thinking about this New Orleans funk band called the Meters. He mentioned two songs. One was Sissy Strut. The other one was People Say. Afterwards, Joe Perry asked drummer Joey Kramer to play something on the drums that could go along with the main guitar riff, and that drum beat and that riff became the song Walk This Way. But the song was not finished yet. They needed a bridge. Therefore, Joe Perry played another riff, and he wanted to use this 1-4-5 chord progression. So he would start in the key of C for the first riff, he would transition to E, then return to C for the verse and chorus. By the end of the sound check, Joe Perry had established the basic musical structure of the song. Meanwhile, when Steven Tyler heard Joe Perry playing the riff, he just listened to them and he began doing some scat vocals of some nonsense words just to get the melody down. But he would write proper lyrics later on. Now you may be wondering where the title of the song came from. It came from producer Jack Douglas, who went to see the Mel Brooks film Young Frankenstein. There's this one scene where Marty Feldman, who plays Igor, tells Gene Wilder to walk this way.
Walk this way. This way.
So that's how Jack Douglas got the title, Walk This Way, for the song later on. Steven Tyler would write the lyrics in One Night in a Hotel, but he forgot them in a taxi and he rewrote them on one of the walls of the stairwell at the record plant, and he did this using a cassette tape of the instrumental track and a portable tape player. In the end, the lyrics tell a story about a teenage boy losing his virginity, and Steven Tyler's lyrics were written to go with the bouncy flow of this instrumentation. But that's not all. The song would resurface in 1986 when hip-hop duo Run DMC was working on their album called Raising Hell. Back then, the producer was Rick Rubin. He pulled out Aerosmith's album Toys in the Attic, and this was a song that Run DMC had previously freestyled over during shows, but it was just something they did casually. Rick Rubin had the idea to bring in Steven Tyler and Joe Perry to record their parts for the Run DMC version. At first, Run DMC tried to mimic Steven Tyler's vocal delivery, but Jam Master Jay convinced them to just use their natural rap flow. Afterwards, Joe Perry would record bass tracks for the song because the studio didn't have a bass guitar available, so they borrowed a bass from another band, which happened to be the Beastie Boys, who also happened to be in that same studio. But at first, Run DMC was hesitant about releasing the track as a single, but when they did, they were surprised. It receives a lot of airplay, not only on the rap stations, but on rock radio stations. So in the end, Run DMC's version of Walk This Way became a big hit. It reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, higher than the actual original song that charted back in the 70s. Not only that, but this song was the beginning of a comeback for Aerosmith, who would release many popular albums in the late 80s and early 90s. And not only that, there was this music video that shows Steven Tyler breaking down a wall. And that's considered to be something symbolic. Not only were there two musical genres coming together, but they were also breaking down these racial barriers, which was something that really couldn't be denied back in the 80s. Now let me talk about the other big song on the album, which was Sweet Emotion. The song was inspired by many different factors. The biggest one was the tension and conflict surrounding the band members' personal relationships, specifically Steven Tyler's feelings towards Joe Perry's then wife Elisa. Basically, Steven Tyler stated that the lyrics, especially the first verse, stemmed from his acrimonious relationship, as he called it, with Joe Perry's wife Elisa. Steven Tyler felt angry at Elisa because she stole my boyfriend, my significant other, and my partner in crime. It was like losing a brother. And this jealousy resulted in some of the dark undercurrents that were channeled into this song. There were also problems with some of the other wives of other members. For example, there was one incident where Lisa Perry threw milk over Tom Hamilton's wife, and although that's not specifically cited in the lyrics, the incident did help influence the song's emotional tone. There's a reference to the rabbit test with the line, "Can't catch me 'cause the rabbit done died," and that was because back in the 70s there was this rabbit test which was used as a pregnancy test. As for the song, the music was written by Steven Tyler and bassist Tom Hamilton. The song features an electric bass guitar riff played by Tom Hamilton, which is tracked alongside a bass marimba played by engineer Jay Messina. According to Jack Douglas, the electric bass is doubled by the bass marimba, and that created this percussion and a low note that went a full octave below the electric bass. Steven Tyler also shakes a packet of sugar in place of maracas at the beginning because they didn't have actual maracas. He also played the vibra slap. This was broken on the third hit, and that sound is actually audible in the final recording. The song uses the talk box by Joe Perry. Probably one of the most famous examples of this effect in popular music because Joe Perry's guitar sings the line "Sweet Emotion" over Hamilton's bass riff, and then Steven Tyler joins in singing in unison with Joe Perry's talkbox, and the talkbox device they used was called the Bag, made by Custom Electronics. In addition, producer Jack Douglas noted that drummer Joey Kramer played on 2s and 4s instead of 1s and 3s, and that gave it a unique groove. The song transitions into more of a rocking rhythm with dueling guitars and rapid-fire angry-sounding lyrics by Steven Tyler. In the end, it became the band's first top 40 hit and was responsible for the success later on in their career. There's an underrated deep cut that I really like, and this is the song "No More, No More." Track number 7, it comes right after "Sweet Emotion." The song was written by both Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. According to the band's autobiography, "Walk This Way," Steven Tyler explained the inspiration behind the lyrics. He stated that "No More, No More" was inspired by life on the road. Steven Tyler also reflected on the internal conflict he experienced at the time, noting, "Sometimes I start thinking about having a wife and child, but the group was my carriage pulling me right along, so I have no time for that now." This suggests that the song's themes might touch upon difficulties in maintaining personal relationships and aspirations while living the demanding lifestyle of a touring musician. There's also the song I really like called "You See Me Crying." The song is a power ballad and the last song on the album. A shorter mix of the song was released as the third single, but it failed to chart. As a result, the original single is considered rather rare. The song was written by lead singer Steven Tyler and outside collaborator Don Solomon. The song is described as a complex piano ballad that was heavily orchestrated. Aerosmith and producer Jack Douglas brought in a symphony orchestra for the song, which was conducted by Mike Mainieri. The song took a long time to complete due to the many complex drum and guitar parts, which frustrated some of the band members. The final version of the song was taken from takes 12, 14, and 15, and the single version was edited down to 3 minutes. Here's some more interesting trivia. Brad Whitford plays lead guitar in the song rather than the band's usual lead guitarist Joe Perry. There's also a song that Aerosmith rarely plays due to its complex arrangement. It features piano and orchestra, so it's kind of hard to play live. But I'm actually surprised it was never a hit. I think it's one of their best ballads. To be honest, I'll take this over any of their later ballads, like from the Get a Grip album, but that's just my opinion. If you want to hear my thoughts on their next album, Rocks, I did a video on it a few years ago when it celebrated the 45th anniversary, and let's stick it right there. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like this video. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.